Protests and rallies have been a regular resource across the world to press demand for reforms, social change, and generally right wrongs. It is considered a legitimate civil undertaking that expresses one of the fundamentals of civil liberty, that is, freedom to expression and hold peaceful, lawful assembly as upheld constitutionally in many countries of the world. Protests give vent and voice to the unheard and draw attention to iniquities, imbalances, and injustice towards redress. The object of protest is quite often the state or corporate establishment required to correct, reverse, implement, or take action on particular cause for agitation. There are significant indications that through protest and demonstration, some lingering major issues have been resolved. Protests are known to be so potent as to trigger even regime change, social-political reforms, public policy reversals, or enforcements. History is replete with several instances where protests as a civil mechanism have righted wrongs and driven and defined change within the public space. Instances that drew global attention include the 16th Northern Europe protest, the Pennsylvania Mutiny of 1783, an anti-government protest by nearly 400 soldiers of the Continental Army, the French Revolution in 1789, and the 1803 Haitian Revolt, which was the first successful black civil action against slavery. There were also the 1920 Blind Street March, when 250 visually impaired persons marched from Manchester to London, leading to the Blind Persons Act, the first disability-specific legislation in the world. In Nigeria, the Igba women tax revolt in 1946 was one protest that also led to a historic change as a resistance movement led by the Abeokuta Women's Union against the imposition of unfair taxation by the Nigerian colonial government. The protest resulted to the abdication of the Alake from the throne, a change in the system of national account, and the temporary abolition of the women's flat tax in Nigeria. Protests were also a strong feature of anti-apartheid struggle in South Africa that contributed to ending the racist segregationist regime in that country. Then there was the protest that spiraled the chain reaction of the Arab Spring across the Arab world. In more recent times were the 2019-2020 Hong Kong protest, the George Floyd protest that sparked global outrage, and the Black Lives Matter movement over the racist killing of an African American man by a police officer in the United States of America. The 2020-2021 United States election protest and the 2020-2021 NSAS protest in Nigeria were equally as defining and profound in many respects. Much as protests have the underpinning of civil liberty, they also come along with inherent downsides and baggage. Protests bear the uncanny burden of going wrong, getting ugly, and out of hand. By its very nature, a rally may be spontaneous, unorganized, and prone to becoming free for all mob street action. To this end, an action to address legitimate concerns is open to hijack by other interests with ulterior motives to pursue hidden clandestine agenda. Therein lies the possibility of the tragic boomerang consequences of protests. These can be in the form of arsons, pillage, carnage, destruction, bloodbath, and even death. There are cases where protests were hijacked by thugs, causing violence that led to loss of lives and properties. For instance, on the 7th of March, 1975, in Selma, Alabama, a 600-person civil rights rally ended in violence, so bad it became known as the infamous Bloody Sunday. Similarly, the Haitian Revolution had an approximate death toll of 345,000, majority of whom were individuals protesting against poor working conditions. Even in the recent EndSARS protest in Nigeria, no fewer than 12 protesters were allegedly killed and several others injured at 2 locations in Lagos. In a report titled Protest and Business by SBM Intelligence, a research and strategic communications firm, 91% of businesses in Lagos Island and Oshodi Solo were badly affected by the EndSARS protest. In effect, unaddressed protest may grow and widen into civil resistance, activism, riots, insurgency, revolts, and political or social revolution. Since 2017 till date, statistics shows that over 230 significant anti-government protests erupted worldwide, while more than 110 countries have experienced significant protests. The concern is that an otherwise civil legitimate action meant to address wrong also go wrong. In other instances, protests put additional pressure on public spending arising from repair and replacement of damaged or stolen infrastructures. The economy and by extension development is also stalled, especially in situations of prolonged protests. The backlash is that what some protests seek to address end up reverberating into worse scenarios. Bottom line is the need for concerted efforts to avoid actions or inactions that can result to protests. Ignoring festering situations by institutions of state is always a clear and present dangerous trigger for protest. Equally, the regular knee-jerk responses of repressive state apparatus like the police, the army, and other agents undermines the more logical approach of restraints as opposed to high-handedness that has not helped. So also is the necessity to retool existing established mechanisms designed to manage and forestall protest from degenerating to dangerous levels. On the whole, protest in itself is a legitimate civil pursuit and must be seen to remain as such to retain its potency and credence.